Hello, scholars. Mr. Long signing on. Today for U.S. government, we're going to be talking about freedoms and liberties in action. We're going to briefly talk about where these freedom and liberties come from, some of the inspiration for them, and how we can see them and use them in our day-to-day lives. First one, harking back to the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, we're going to be looking at religious freedom. Founding fathers, or at least their ancestors, when they came over to North America during the age of colonization in the New World, several of them had suffered religious persecution from the governments themselves of European countries. Much of that comes from the Catholic Protestant wars and conflicts following the Protestant Reformation, all the way up through, King Henry VIII establishing the Anglican Church in England. There's a lot of Catholic Protestant bad blood from that historical context. So as the founding fathers were establishing this country, they wanted to ensure that religious minorities would be protected. And I'm emphasizing the part of minorities because keep in mind that the liberties and rights discussed throughout this presentation and throughout this unit as a whole are mostly utilized by the minorities, whether it's the religious minorities, ethnic minorities, or even ideological minorities, such as, look at Nazis or communists, people that make up a small group of the whole U.S. population. They're the ones that benefit the most from having their rights, because those who are in the majority with the large group of people, they don't have as much to fear from the government because they're typically represented in government through their elected representatives. But it's the minorities that really need to have their rights protected so that they can have their freedom of speech and freedom of religion or what have you. So the First Amendment establishes that the government may not have an official religion. Thomas Jefferson, arguably one of the first to argue for a wall of separation between church and state. Again, this is to ensure that the religious minorities of the country would be protected from the religious majorities that would be best represented by the government and Congress. Government facilities, including our high school, may display religious iconography if the display is not exclusive to one religion, if the display has a secular or non-religious purpose. There are times where driving around town or in civilization, you might see Christmas trees up at government facilities or other religious iconography, especially around the holidays like Christmas and Hanukkah. And it's not unusual to see those. And there is a level of debate about how appropriate it is to have religious iconography in government buildings. Same goes for examples of the 10 Commandments that you may see in courtrooms around the country. Now, when it comes to just one specific religious symbol from one religion, let's take the 10 Commandments for an example. 10 Commandments is a Christian symbol used widely by Christians and members of the Jewish faith, and having that up on a courtroom wall has roots in the way Christians were judged within their religion, but because it's more exclusive to one religion, not all religions, typically the courts will not side in favor of it. Now, if you see a manger scene and a menorah for Hanukkah around the holidays and different other religious icons, take the coexist symbol for an example, because it's not exclusive to one sect of religion or one group of society, governments have an easier time of getting away with it. The government use of iconography also should have a secular or non-religious purpose if it's going to be approved. For example, a Christmas tree, sometimes people in government buildings will refer to it as a holiday tree because it's just to celebrate the holiday of the season, not necessarily one specific religion. So if you are encompassing a variety of different religions and it has a non-religious purpose, typically government buildings can get away with it. Another example of freedom of religion or the separation between government and religion, is that here at the public school, we have a moment of silence after the morning announcements. Now, the moment of silence is not exclusive to any one religion. You can pray in any creed, any language. You can just reflect on what you're grateful for. Think about your family members that might be in the hospital, whatever it may. You can reflect on whatever you want. So it's not exclusive to any one religion, and it's optional that if you want to continue working on your homework during homeroom and not take the time to reflect, then you're free to do so. You can choose to take advantage of that moment or not. So because it has it's encompassing all religions, and it's just a good reflection period, and it's not specific to prayer itself, the school is allowed to have a moment of silence for those who want to take part. Freedom of speech and press, again, established by the First Amendment. This was established in order to allow discussion and debate to further educate democratic citizens. A big part of our republic democracy is empowering the citizens to be engaged in government decisions, even though they're not directly voting on them, to at least talk about it, formulate their ideals, be able to support them and defend them against people who may have a differing viewpoint, and have a civil discussion about it. Can't do that without freedom of speech or freedom of the press. Again, the freedoms here are typically protecting minorities, because if you have an opinion in line with most other people, you don't really have to defend it as passionately as if you have a strongly differing opinion. And so with these rights, we're focusing again on the minorities and how they can be protected. An example of a minority would be if a group of neo-Nazis wanted to hold a rally to protest a government action. Because they are a minority group, they are going to have their freedom of speech and freedom of assembly to it's going to be protected. You're going to see law enforcement there to make sure that counter protesters aren't interfering with their right to peacefully assemble and peacefully protest, which again is protecting the minorities here. Government can censor free speech in the following circumstances. Obscenity, this one is difficult to define, in large part because of the role art has in our culture, where, for example, if you see violence or nudity in a movie, that may be protected because it's part of the story and the art of the movie. And so it's really weird to see where that line is between art and obscenity. Slander, these are spoken false statements that defame someone's character. So if you said a blatant lie to make Mr. Long look bad, that would be slander, and there could be consequences for that. Libel, it's the same as slander, but in written form. So if you're posting something on Facebook that's untrue and malicious to Mr. Long's character, then we may have a discussion about that. Treason, the crime of making war against the U.S. or giving aid and comfort to its enemies. So you can't really use your free speech if you're directly trying to harm the national government and the people the national government are trying to protect. Sedition, speech or actions that inspire revolt against the government. And sedition folds nicely into clear and present danger, which is speech or actions that may cause imminent and direct harm to others. So an example of this the classic example is yelling fire in a movie theater. If you're sitting in a movie theater and someone gets up and starts yelling fire, 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 your first reaction is to get out. And so you have hundreds of people getting up. They're trying to get through only a couple doors, and people could be harmed or trampled if they're tripping in the dark, or people are shoving them out of the way to save their own skins. And if people are harmed in the escape and there was actually no fire, that it was a false alarm, then your freedom to yell fire in a crowded movie theater in a crowded space is not necessarily protected. So you could have a lawsuit on your hands for that. Similarly, you have yelling bomb on an airplane. You can't really yell bomb on an airplane because it's going to cause a panic that may cause some issues there. Freedom of assembly and petition. Much of this falls in line with freedom of speech, that so long as you're not inciting violence or doing anything illegal, typically the government will protect your right to do so. And again, if you are part of a group that's protesting something, whether you're for example, here we have the picture on the bottom left is a neo-Nazi rally. Bottom right is a Black Lives Matter protest. That as long as you're just there to peacefully assemble, to demonstrate your group's resolve and how organized you are to try to influence the government to do something, the government will protect that right. They will typically have, you'll see police officers there to make sure that you're being peaceful and following all the rules, but also to make sure that other people don't interfere with your right to assemble. This has strong roots going back to the town hall meetings of the early democracies of the American colonies, where people in a community could freely come together to talk about different issues, vote on different issues. And that tradition continues through today, not just with local town halls or presidential debates, but also your right to assemble and talk about whatever it may be. So, let's say you want to get together with some people and talk about communism, because communism is a little taboo, or during the Red Scare in particular was very taboo. You should be able to do that. Now, if you're getting together with your communist buddies to talk about overthrowing the United States government, then that's less okay and probably not going to be protected. But if you're just getting together to talk about economic reforms or Karl Marx or whatever it may be, then yeah, you should be free to do those things. And again, must be peaceful and must not include any discussions of illegal actions. That's a pretty good way to turn it from freedom to a crime. Right to keep and bear arms. This is in the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This one has not been overly discussed in the history of the United States. However, it's become more and more prominent in the 21st and late 20th century with the rise of mass shootings at schools and concerts and nightclubs or what have you. And so as people start to use weapons for malicious and criminal acts, the courts and public opinion have been debating about how much these rights need to be protected. In general, the courts do defend the citizens' right to bear arms. However, they also give the government the freedom to enforce and implement a few restrictions that are reasonable from the government's perspective, such as having to register your firearm, banning firearms from school property, and not allowing citizens to own some types of assault-style weapons, which, again, these perspectives change with the times, but the right to keep and bear arms is not 100% guaranteed to everybody and everything, that there are some restrictions on here, which is kind of picking and choosing which parts of the amendment to enforce, depending on how well read you are on constitutional law and your perspective on the purism of the Constitution. Security of home and person. These are covered by the Third and Fourth Amendment, the Third and the 14th later on. The Third Amendment, government cannot house troops in private homes. During the colonial period before the American Revolution, the British, as a cost-saving measure, put soldiers in the homes of private citizens because it was cheaper than putting them in barracks and feeding them with the government's money, which of course upsets people, because who wants this total stranger with a rifle sleeping on your couch and eating all your food? Might be a little upsetting to some people. So as the Third Amendment, when they were building the Bill of Rights, they were like, all right, we need to keep the government from being able to do this during peacetime. There are some exceptions during wartime, or if you give permission to the government to house soldiers, but because of the 13th Amendment, the government can just show up and be like, hi, this is Staff Sergeant Long. He's going to be living on your couch for the next few months. Fourth Amendment forbids unreasonable searches and seizures. This, as it has evolved, has required law enforcement to have probable cause or search warrants to inspect and search your property. You'll see this in how many cop shows or movies, whether you're watching The Wire or CSI or anything along those lines, that the cop has to have reasonable cause. So, for example, if you're speeding and you get pulled over and the cop smells alcohol on your breath, they can search your car and give you a breathalyzer because they have reason to suspect that you maybe were drinking or driving under the influence of alcohol. For search warrants, this is, the cop has to be able to prove ahead of time that, yes, we have reasonable suspicion that there's something illegal or part of an investigation in this residence, and they'll get a search warrant from the judge, and they'll be able to go and effectively search your house because they have that paperwork ahead of time saying, yes, we have cause to search your house. And a judge's approval, remember, checks and balances, the judge's approval to search your house. Recent developments such as electronic communication and the war on terror have introduced new questions when discussing the Fourth Amendment. So there has been debate about how for example, your Facebook posts or your Google search history, how can the government search those without a warrant? Because if you're posting something on Facebook, then it's public knowledge, but it's also your written communication and part of your property. So to what extent can the government search that without reasonable cause or without a warrant, which is still an ongoing debate. War on terror, in particular wiretaps, with the government spying on communication between foreigners suspected of terrorist activities and U.S. citizens. Well, by doing so, you're also indirectly violating the American citizens' right to privacy in the Fourth Amendment, because there may not be a warrant for that search. Reasonable cause by association with a suspected terrorist. Maybe if you stretch that out a little bit, but that's another one that's a hot button topic for constitutional lawyers. So tried to keep this brief for you guys. I just want to hit on some of the key parts about civil rights, freedoms, and liberties. I have 3 check-on learning questions for you to answer on Canvas. 1, when can a government facility display religious iconography? 2, why was the freedom of speech and press included in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? So think back to the inspiration for that. And 3, when can law enforcement search an American citizen's property? Take a look at those questions. You should be able to find the answer, or at least get you started on the answer throughout this video. If you have any questions or concerns, be sure to reach out to me in class or via email, and we will try to get you guys squared away. Other than that, I am good to go. Doing my mental checklist. I think I hit everything I need, and I am done. Mr. Long, over and out.